Welcome to this presentation of the Rotary Club of North Bethesda, Maryland, USA. Our club was established in 1974. We meet every Friday morning at 7:45 a.m., and we often invite guest speakers to give presentations on all kinds of interesting subjects. Please contact us through our website at nbrotary.org. And thanks for watching. Our speaker today is Clarence Hickey, who will be sharing about periodical cicadas in 2021, an intersection of natural history and human history.
A most educational experience for me, listening to all the chatter here and learning about garlic. Maybe we'll try some garlic when the cicadas come out here in the springtime. I don't know.
That's an idea.
Yeah.
Do you mind if we record you?
That'll be fine.
Thank you.
So this is how I propose to use our time today. If you can see this here, I'm trying to adjust my own screen. I want to talk to you about what you already are understanding, and I understand several people have some prior experience here. I want to talk about the Montgomery County's numerous and interesting native residents. These cicadas were natives here long before you and me. And I'll talk a little bit about history. A well-known Maryland historical person, Benjamin Banneker, sort of led the way for us here, and I'll explain what that's about. And talk about a comet, which will visit us this springtime. This is the comet Pons-Winnecke, and I'll explain this. We'll be here during the same time the cicadas are. And I'll do a very, very brief little bit about the natural history of cicadas, a little bit about their biology, just so you understand if you don't already. And then a very brief bit about one of the neighborhoods I experienced in 1987 in Bethesda. And then, just as a forewarning, talk to you about the return of the persics. And then some information about how we might share all this when all this happens. So we'll see how this is going to work out. This will not be a treatise on cicada science or biology. It's going to be a little more infusing some history, and I want to help you get ready for these fellas, my friends, these cicadas, and be able to enjoy them and not just go, ah, when they arrive, which some people will do, of course. But they come on schedule en masse every 17 years, as you already have noted, and they will be among us. Now, when I look at this fellow, you might disagree with this, but this looks kind of like your cat or your puppy climbing over the sofa or the armchair to get your attention, maybe to engage you in some play. Now, I don't think cicadas are going to quite do that, but they are very interesting animals, and they will be readily available for you to pick up and examine and get to know. They're actually quite interesting. And the fact that the periodical cicadas seem to appear or reappear on schedule every 17 years suggests to me a certain measure of stability in our local environment, sort of a natural sign for us that this happens every cycle predictably. So these animals, these cicadas, are not dangerous. They do not sting. They do not bite. They carry no diseases. And they do not attack and eat our crops or our gardens or our flowers. They're just kind of here with us en masse. And I'll have to admit, when you look at a cicada up close and personal, it even looks like it might be wearing a mask during these pandemic times. And I will admit also that this probably is only a face a mother could love. Now, the cicadas are grouped into what scientists call broods. The brood, or the group that will visit us this spring, is Roman 10, brood 10. And this is the area, basically, it's actually a little more expansive than this, but brood 10 will visit us, and also will be in parts of Pennsylvania, Delaware, maybe a bit in New Jersey, and Maryland, of course, and Virginia, and West Virginia. And if I can do this again, See, of course, this is D.C. and Montgomery County here. And we're going to be right in the thick of it. And the scientists define a brood of cicadas as a population of cicadas isolated from all others, from all other populations by their year of emergence or their locality. So this is brood 10 here, which we will see in 2021. And all these other different broods that are within the driving shot of us have their own years and their own spaces and their own times. So they will not be overlapping. When we witness these cicadas in May and June, it will be brood 10, which often has been called the Great Eastern Brood, the largest of all the broods of cicadas in the East. And the periodical cicadas occur only in the Eastern U.S. They aren't west of the continental divide. Now, the annual cicadas, the ones that come out every July and August and into the fall, you know, we have those nationwide, but they don't overlap. By the time the annual cicadas come out probably in July and August, the periodicals will be done. So there's no group competition there. Well, this is the person I mentioned. You're probably familiar with him with a little bit of Maryland history. This is Benjamin Banneker, and he was one of the early naturalists to record scientific observations on the 17-year periodical cicadas. And he did this from his home and on his farm in Ellicott Mills in Ellicott City here in Maryland, between here and Baltimore, or that place that native Marylanders call Baltimore, Maryland, wherever that is. Banneker was a free African-American who lived from 1731 to 1806 in Maryland. He was mostly self-educated and became proficient in mathematics, astronomy, natural history. He wrote several almanacs. He was a surveyor, a landowner, a farmer, and he kept a series of journals and notebooks of all his observations, his scientific and astronomical observations, including his look at cicadas. And in the year 1800, he had an expose on what he had seen and how many times he had seen the cycle of these cicadas in Ellicott City. And he wrote at the end of one of his pieces in the journals, he wrote, and I'll quote here, "So that if I may venture so to express it, their periodical return is 17 years. But they, like the comets, make but a short stay with us." So Banneker was comparing the periodic and predictable lives of these cicadas to be like that of comets, which are also predictable and periodic. Both take a long time to reappear, but when they do reappear, they reappear with great gusto, and they get our attention. And just by the stroke or the will or the grace of Mother Nature, a comet will make a pass by Earth this spring during the same time that the cicadas are with us. And this is the predicted path over time this spring for comet Pons-Winnecke. It is named for the two astronomers who described it over time. Pons was French and Winnecke was German. But this is the time period. This is the trace of the comet before it disappears over the horizon. So 1-7 is July 1st. 1-6 is June 1st. So this is the month of July, and this is the month of May. The comet will be closest to us in late May, latter May. So, and it'll be early morning. You have to go out early in the morning before 5 o'clock or so while it's still dark. And I think it's going to be in the southeastern sky. And when you look there, you'll see Jupiter and Saturn, and up between them will be the comet. Now, the cicadas will be with us from early to mid-May to mid or latter June during this very same time period that Banneker was equating the periodicity and the regularity of cicadas and comets. And this spring, we're going to have the great goodwill to see both. And by my rough calculations, these two natural events, the reappearance of the cicadas every 17 years and the reappearance of comet Pons-Winnecke every 6 1/3 years, they will probably not do this again or coincide like this again until about the year 20 1972. About 51 years from today. So this is a rare concurrent event seen by most people just once in their lifetime. And we will see both of these events together during this spring, May and June. This is probably our once in a lifetime to witness both of these events together. Well, cicadas require trees for their life cycle. Without trees, there are no cicadas. And without trees in our neighborhoods, our quality of life would be less. One of the things that makes the DMV rather nice and livable is how green it gets around here in the spring and in the summer. Trees also help to remove carbon from the atmosphere, as you know, and this helps combat climate change. Take away trees and cicada history changes. Take away trees and our human history and our quality of life changes. So we have something in common with our cicada friends, and that is we both need trees. Well, this is what these fellows look like when they're in the ground. I sneaked up on this one with my camera. Sometimes when you try to sneak up on these guys and they're out looking around, they'll withdraw quickly down into their burrow. But I managed to sneak up on this fellow, and you know, they are in the ground for 17 years, and when they're out, they have a Zoom life for a couple of weeks, and then they're done. It's quite a life cycle. The entire cycle for the cicadas from when they emerge until when they finish is probably 4 to 6 weeks for the whole brood to do that. So when they'll be coming up to the surface, and they'll be monitoring and assessing the environmental conditions, the temperature, the light, and the ground temperature. And when their hormones and physiology say it's time, that's when they will emerge, and they will move about looking for some place to go vertically. They are going up. They have a tropism that takes them skyward, and they'll climb up the trees, and they'll molt from their shell, and I'll show you how this works, but they'll molt from their shell, kind of like a blue crab. In order to grow, it must climb out of that old shell and then expand to a larger size, or like a butterfly emerging from a cocoon or a chrysalis. That's what happens with the cicada, and they need some time to hang vertically to let gravity help them with their wing expansion. And when they first emerge from the shell is when they're most vulnerable. They're really soft and vulnerable, and this is when they would serve as a food source for some predators, birds primarily, but also this is when those who like to eat them will put them in the deep fryer. And then when they climb up vertically, they'll attach to the tree. They'll become very rigid. The back of the cicada, if I can get my pointer going. What happened to my pointer? Well, the back of the cicada will split open, and then this will happen. One more time.
Wow.
When they do this, they'll get to a point here where they will just hang horizontally like this for 15 or 20 minutes while the wings begin to expand and the front legs harden so that they can climb, so they can grab on and climb. And mostly they'll hold on to their old shell, but sometimes they'll swing away from that and hold on to the tree, but they need to be able to do that. And they need some time here for their hormones and their physiology to catch up to what's going on. Well, then they become the flying adult, which will live for a few weeks. Once they need several hours for the body to harden and the wings to expand and the wings to become firm so that they can become the flying, reproducing adult. 17 years in the ground for a couple of weeks of a life. Well, with respect to eye color, most of the cicadas we see, we have these deep red or burgundy, crimson eye color, kind of like our football team. Some have black eyes. I've seen others with yellow. orange, pumpkin color, tan, and only twice have I seen this one with baby blue, almost white colored eyes. Very rare. I saw one in 1987 in Bethesda and one in 2004 in my backyard. They're very rare. In 1987, the University of Maryland, the scientists there, the entomologists studying cicadas, were looking for these really rare blue-eyed cicadas. And they offered to the public $50 to anyone who could bring them a blue-eyed cicada. And then in 2004, they're still studying these, and the price went up. They offered $500 to anyone who could bring them a blue-eyed cicada for their research. Now, I like research, but I just couldn't capture these live blue-eyed cicadas and turn them in. So
any offer for 2021?
I haven't heard yet. I haven't heard, but hold out for at least 500. Well, then they will mate. They'll go up into the canopy. Once they became flying adults, they go up, and they're in the treetops in the canopy, and that's where you'll hear all the singing, all that loud noise, and it's the males that do the singing to attract the female. So for 17 years, they're in the ground, and for a few weeks, they're in the treetops, and you and I are kind of in between there. So they will mate, and the female, with the organ called an ovipositor, will lay eggs in the stems of the branches of trees way out on the tip where the new growth is tender, and they will deposit a dozen eggs or so in several, they call them nests, and a female cicada can lay 400 to 600 eggs. And if I expand this, the laying of the eggs stops. But this is what happens. And then this was a piece of twig that was in my yard. You can see where the cicada has dug into it when it was fresh and green and deposited the eggs. And then these tree branch tips will turn brown usually and die from what has just happened. And after 6 weeks or so, the eggs hatch and the young, very, very tiny cicadas fall to the ground. Or sometimes these branch tips will break off and fall to the ground. This was in Rock Creek Park in 1987. You can see what's happened with the cicadas. This is probably the only thing that's near to damage that the cicadas do. But the horticulturists have told me this will not endanger any individual tree or the forest, and in some respects might even be a bit like a natural pruning. Except in our neighborhoods, if we're planting young trees, particularly fruit trees, this might have an effect on the young trees you're trying to grow in your yard. And the horticulturists say that if you're planning to do some planting this year when the cicadas are out, just wait till they're done. Don't do it in early spring. Do it in latter June as a way of avoiding what's going on here. So what happened? How about our neighborhoods? Well, I've heard a lot of experience already through our chatter this morning of you folks who've had experience here based on where you lived in Silver Spring or in Bethesda or maybe Tacoma Park and our down county neighborhoods and in Northwest DC. In 1987, in Bethesda, this was not uncommon. And this was something that people were trying to not to experience. But for me, I don't see it as that much of a problem, but a lot of folks are gonna when this happens. And they're going to go, zombies, we're being attacked by zombie cicadas. Well, no. They're really not the zombie cicadas as such. But I did notice in Bethesda in 1987, I worked in the Woodmont Triangle area in a federal office building there. And so in Bethesda then and now in a number of our neighborhoods, there's a nice sidewalk restaurant trade. And a lot of these sidewalk restaurants have trees, and people like to go to lunch there and sit beneath the trees and have a break in the workday. Well, in 1987, the sidewalk restaurant trade in Bethesda became overrun with cicadas, and they actually shut down for 1 or 2 weeks in latter May and early June. People were not coming to lunch there, I guess. I suppose a cicada in your soup would not be desirable. But I'll have to admit to you that if I were there and I had to choose between a fly in my soup or a cicada, you know what I'd do. I'm just saying. So, but just keep calm, folks. They're just 17-year cicadas. But where do they come from? In the business district of Bethesda. Well, they come from the neighborhoods in around Bethesda, particularly the neighborhoods to the west and the south. The other side, the west of Old Georgetown Road, where our neighborhoods are well established and have lots of trees. And there was one neighborhood in particular that I would visit because it was a good place for cicadas, was the Edgemore neighborhood. To the west of Old Georgetown Road and a couple hundred yards perhaps from the business district in Bethesda. And in that neighborhood, this is one of the things I saw on some of the lawns. All these dark little blobs here is where the cicadas are beginning to push up from underneath to come out and emerge. And when they emerge in an area like this where the grass is a little high or where there's like leaf litter in the forest on top of the ground, the cicadas will make a chimney or a tunnel that actually sticks up above the ground 2 to 3 inches to get above that litter or above the grass so that they can figure out when it's time to emerge. And there was one yard I saw in the Edgemore neighborhood where there were so many of these turrets or chimneys sticking above the ground that they just obliterated the presence of a lawn. It was very intense. In 1987. In 04, I don't think it was quite as intense there. It didn't seem to me, but you may have another opinion on that. Well, these cicadas, they want to go vertically, trees mostly, but they'll climb anything they can get a grip on. And they have no respect for things that may have already happened here. And then there was one yard in the neighborhood where I smelled a very, very strong odor of insecticide, where the residents were trying to thwart the cicadas in their yard. And it did not. It did not thwart the cicadas. It delayed a bit their emergence, but they still emerged. And some residents even wrapped their trees with some plastic to keep the cicadas from climbing up, which it did. But that just meant the cicadas would complete their life cycle below that. And once they became the flying adult, of course, they had the run of the neighborhoods, and that's how they got into the business district. Well, by mid to latter June, this was the appearance of the neighborhood when all these millions of cicada shells fell to the ground off the trees with the weathering and the wind, and it was not very sightly, and even had a pungent smell for a while. And in some ways, a little bit different, but in some ways, seeing these cicada shells on the ground reminded me of some beaches I've seen that are riddled with seashells of all sorts, which is evidence of life that lived there. That when you find a seashell on the beach, it's evidence of some life form that was there. And when you see different seashells on beaches, you can get some idea of the ecology of the ocean nearby. But this was the flying adult that created all that. And I think that looking at some of this, though, I really think that humans and cicadas can coexist. I really believe that. Although some would argue that the presence of these insects is an infestation, and some would argue that the closing the outdoor dining is a problem, and that the smell is a harm. But I would offer that all of this is temporary, and 17 years between, with no real human casualties, no physical injuries. Now, we might ask our resident physicians here about that. But I see a great benefit for we humans in being able to share our environment. You know, these places that are good for our living also can be good for this natural animal. And it's a signal or of a certain stability in our engineered landscapes, our neighborhoods that we've managed. Especially during this pandemic time, there's something natural and normal going on here. You know, you might argue about that, but that place where I smelled insecticide really got my attention, and I was doing some research there. And the University of Maryland Extension Service, and I'm going to read this, the Extension Service stated, and I quote, Insecticides are ineffective for significantly reducing cicada abundance and damage. Insecticides also pose a risk to people, beneficial insects, and even birds. So the University of Maryland was suggesting that maybe insecticide use, is not a good idea, and it's ineffective as well. So I think that a cicada emergence or re-emergence on schedule, as predicted, appears to have been a loud shout out from Mother Nature to us, saying all is well in your suburban residential environment that you care for. It's stable and healthy. And Mother Nature might even say, thank you for cooperating here. Well, I may be pushing the limit on some of this, but this is what's going to happen in the springtime. Return of the persicks coming to a neighborhood near you. Persicks, of course, are the periodical cicadas. And will it be an attack of the alien cicadas? No. Will there be zombie and mutant cicadas roaming our neighborhoods at night, creating havoc? No. Will they be everywhere all the time? No. Will it be our time to scream? I don't think so. Just keep calm, folks. It's just 17-year cicadas that living among us because of the way we live in some respects. And for me, they're part of summer's official soundtrack. Cicadas during the day, they don't sing at night, but during the day, and it can be quite deafening when they really, really are abundant. The noise can be around 100 decibels, so it can be a bit loud. But for me, it's a sound of summer, kind of like the crickets and the katydids at night. I'll often sit out on my back deck in the summertime on a nice night and just listen to the nighttime insects. Crickets mostly in the summer, and then toward fall, the katydids join in. It's really, for me, quite nice. And this is, you'll be able to do this if you so desire. Some people will not, but these guys are my friends, and I enjoy observing them and studying them. And I've got several projects I'm going to try to do this summer just because while they're here. Boys don't seem to mind this as much as girls. I can't really explain that. Maybe our physicians can help us out here. But this is what I like to suggest. Now, I may be pushing the boundary again here, but I'm calling this Watusi. Now, for some of you older teenagers might remember the Watusi in the 1960s, a dance and a song. But this is different. This is my acronym, and I'd like to suggest that we try to do this and help our friends to do this, help to welcome the cicadas, appreciate the naturalness of what they are, understand them, teach others what's going on here. Once we understand something, our anxiety drops. If we can understand what's happening around us. And I might even push the limit a little farther and say that maybe through all of this, realizing some unity among people and cicadas, maybe we can, and helping others to understand, we can help support our new president's call for unity. I know I'm pushing the boundary here. But I'd like to suggest that while our human society may have some issues right now for this last year or so, nature does continue on. This spring, we will see both a terrestrial event and a celestial event. Both are part of nature's normality. While we're trying to get back to some state of normality and maybe even redefine what that means, nature's already there. This will be part of nature's normality. And isn't it nice that some things are going on as scheduled and as predicted, and wonderful things like this?
Wow.
The Maryland Department of Agriculture has stated, and I quote here again, scientifically, cicadas offer a unique opportunity for study. Philosophically, think of the number of times you may view this rare phenomenon in one lifetime. The emergence of brood 10 should be looked at as a wonder and not a calamity. So I and my cicada friends wish you peace, dude.
When do you cook?
Clarence is excellent presentation.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Clarence.
All right.
Excellent presentation.
That was great. Super fun.
So, Clarence,
That's
this is Bob
interesting.
Sonamani. I'm an entomologist by training. I did my PhD actually in entomology. I have 3 comments. One, the cicadas has been there for 1.7 million or about almost 2 million years on an evolutionary scale. The second comment, which when I was a student in entomology, both back in India as well as here in this country, I was told that cicadas are used as excellent food by many cultures, particularly Chinese culture. They actually barbecue the cicadas and like a shish kebabs that one could make. They also use in an ice cream. And so cicadas are excellent food in some cultures, actually. The third comment, I think, going back to what Kevin said, is maybe we can have a project on the club can take a project for this spring, where we can collect those blue-eyed cicadas and maybe collect the money from the University of Maryland.
Fundraiser, yeah.
I think it's not a bad idea. I mean, if you ask the kids in the school, say, okay, if you collect the cicada, you get a $50 and we submit all the cicadas to the University of Maryland and raise the funds.
There you go.
And the last comment I have, the cicadas, I understand and correct me, Clarence, is only the males make sound that flipping their wings and not the females.
That's correct.
So I think, if I remember it, there was some kind of a saying, the happier the cicadas' lives, the happier the cicadas' lives, their female lives, because only males make the sound or something like to that effect.
That is correct. And this is how they do it.
How deep do they go in the ground, Clarence?
I'm sorry?
How deep do they go in the ground?
I've read accounts that say that when they're, years before the emergence, they might be 2 or 3 feet deep. I saw one report said that they were as deep as about 6 feet. But
And what do they feed on when they're in the ground?
They use this beak here in the ground to tap into the roots. And they essentially, their energy source is essentially what we would say is the sap of trees. And then when they're adults, they feed a little less, I think, but they still use that beak and they'll tap into the leaves of trees for some nutrients and for moisture. It's the male cicada, and it's this big back end. It's like a balloon that resonates when these muscles vibrate and makes that sound. It's not the wings. Some insects make the sound with the wings, but the cicada, it's this resonating chamber that vibrates.
Where is brain?
Oh.
Is there any evidence that garlic will repel cicadas?
It's worth a try.
But when it's in the ground for 17 years, does it eat anything?
Yes, their food source below ground is the roots of plants, trees, and other things. They'll tap into the roots for moisture and for the nutrients that's in the sap of the trees.
Clarence,
Actually,
I noticed on your map, Brood 2 in 2013 was split between Pennsylvania and Virginia. How did that happen?
I've got another. Yeah, it is. That's exactly right. There's another map here. Let me see if I can pull it out here. This one. This shows the broods. Our brood 10 is this yellow one here.
Yeah.
Which is us here, and then over in the Midwest and even down into Tennessee. Yeah, that's right. It is spread out. But this is what we will experience here in the Northeast.
Yeah, but I noticed that Brood 2 was split between up there in the Northeast and down in Virginia.
Yeah, here's this red is Brood 2.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. It's got a long, almost looks like it follows the mountains.
So
and this Brood 9 is not on the eastern shore. I saw that on the first map.
Yeah, the first map. Yeah, these maps are a little bit different, and I've have friends and colleagues are over in the eastern shore, which is really coastal plain, and cicadas seem to be not quite as abundant there, and that may have to do partly with the terrain. This is a big sandbar out there, and in its natural state, the tree there's there were fewer tall hardwoods and a lot more evergreen, and the evergreen trees are not conducive to cicadas.
In 1970, we lived in Bethesda and had a cat who loved to eat them. And they're supposed to be full of protein.
They are.
The vet said, don't worry about it. It's good for them.
Yep, they are full of protein. That's why people will eat them. You know, collect them when they've just emerged from the shell, or in there, just like that soft shell crab.
Yeah.
That's the time to deep fry them or whatever you do. They apparently are very high in protein.
There's a book by entomologist by Jenna Jardine, that's her name, about the cookbook for the Cicada cookbook.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I have a couple garlic. Give me garlic. I have a couple comments.
Yeah.
I'm a retired arborist, and I've had a lot of experience with cicadas. And I agree that pesticides don't work, and they don't damage large trees, but they do damage young trees. And yeah, I agree that you should postpone planting new trees this spring until after the cicadas are finished. And if you have any young trees that you've planted in the last 5 years, or if you have any very small ornamental trees like Japanese maples, you should really cover them with netting, the same sort of thing that fruit tree farmers use, and secure the netting around the lower stem of the tree so it's completely covered. Because the damage of the females laying their eggs at the end of their life cycle can just kill so many small pencil diameter branches on these young trees. You could actually lose a tree in these big cicada attacks.
Thank you.
So
Thank you very much.
And the last thing is, I shared a link in the chat on Zoom here with a cool YouTube video called Return of the Cicadas.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks very much. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
People here have a lot of experience. This is nothing new for most of you.
Awesome. All right. Any other questions?
You know, I would
Can you repeat the date for the comic to be seen in this area? Is May 1st?
It'll be May and June. It'll be closest to Earth. You know, it has a 6 1/3 year cycle swinging around the sun and coming past Earth. And it'll be late May when it's closest to the Earth. But this is not going to be a comet that was visible like Halley or Kohoutek that you may remember. I mean, it's going to be a lot fainter than that. And you might even need your field glasses to help you see it, but it's going to be there.
May I have a question? I know it's a time. Clarence, you know, I'm sorry, I understood it's a cycle and this cicada what you like so much dying. How they appeared underground for next 17 years, how it's happened, you know, in the underground.
Well, they live underground for that 17 years, and they grow underground. They actually emerge from their shell. You know, in order for them to grow, they have to climb out of that shell so they can grow, because the shell won't expand. And underground, they do that.
I understood, you know, I understood this cycle, but how they appeared underground for 17 years, how it started, you know, somebody sees. What was beginning of all this?
How did they evolve to a 17-year underground life cycle?
Yeah.
There's a good question. Some cicadas have evolved with a 13-year life cycle. And apparently these cicadas have been with us through the last ice age for many 100,000 years or something, as was mentioned. And they have evolved apparently in response to the change in temperature on the Earth, and with the glaciers and the ice cycles. And one of the things that helped them to survive as these glaciers are moving up and down is to be underground. It's very interesting when you think about it. you know, if, for example, if in the 2004, when they were with us, if you were a young parent and your child was born in 2004, by the next time you saw the cicadas, your child would almost be finished high school. It's really strange.
Yeah, the first time I saw him was in high school.
High school was a while ago, wasn't it? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Clarence.
It was very interesting.